Welcome to another installation of Yoga Therapy Graduates. And where am I now? And where am I going? We're welcoming Rand Coleman, Dr. Rand Coleman, to the show today. Rand is originally from Wisconsin, but when he did his psychological training to become a psychologist, he was at Hahnemann University in Philadelphia, and now he finds himself in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia. And Rand, we're really happy to have you here today.
Thank you.
Say hi.
Hi, everybody.
and I've got Rand all set up to share his yoga background briefly, just how he got into it originally. So jump off, Rand.
Yeah, I did not know much about yoga, but I did a lot of martial arts, and I started with Taekwondo, and I did judo and Aikido and whatnot. And when I was probably around age 28, somewhere in that zone, I had accumulated a couple of injuries and needed to take a break from doing martial arts or really more intensive exercise generally. And I was casting around for something that seemed doable, that might be healthy for me. And there was a yoga class at the YMCA, and having seen a little bit of yoga through through the window, I thought, some of those moves look a lot like martial arts moves, and maybe that would be good for me. I was sort of familiar with that, and indeed it worked very well for me. I did I think a course. It was like an 8-week type of course with some lady leading us through the different exercises, and it really rehabilitated my injuries. I was able to go back to some of my other athletic endeavors, which included a little bit of biking and running and the martial arts and whatnot. And I not only did it help me just with the injury stuff, but it improved some of my flexibility, and I really enjoyed this sort of peaceful, mindful approach to exercise. So it
Nice.
kind of stayed in the back of my mind after that as something that I might do again in the future.
Cool. So when did you pick yoga back up in your life?
Oh gosh, I think it was probably, it would have been like another 10 years or something that I
Okay.
came back to it. In the intervening time, I did a lot of hiking and other kinds of things, then returned to martial arts when my own kids were about at that age and could do it. And I was doing rock climbing and martial arts with them. And it was a more integrative approach to martial arts that I was involved with, a style of martial arts called Kung Nu. And we would do some yoga at times, like more of what you might call a power yoga approach. So there's intense stretching, but also a lot of strength moves. And that pulled me back in, and I did a couple of yoga classes again at the YMCA, and felt like, wow, it just makes me feel good and kind of healthy, and my body feels more limber and energetic after I do this. So that became something that I would do just periodically for flexibility and more of an isometric type of strength. Yeah.
And then you discovered our teacher's training, and what led you to want to go in that direction?
Yeah, well, there are actually at least two converging pathways on this. The first was that I was getting to a point where I wanted to step back from martial arts. I liked the physicality of it, but it was absorbing so much of my time, and I was really trying to move in a more spiritual direction and integrate. If I was going to do a lot of exercise, I wanted to have a spiritual component, and I felt like I'd spent enough years, practicing how to beat people up.
So you were feeling martial arts getting to be a little bit of strenuousness. I know that you're not talking about your work, that you're a very busy psychologist with a lot of clients, patients. You do a lot of testing, you work with children, you train people on how to work with children, and you work with adults on top of that. So you're also very busy. So the yoga is probably providing a lot of stress relief.
Yes. And I had a colleague who was trained in yoga therapy herself and integrated it with her, all the other counseling stuff that she did. And this was a period of time when I was working a lot with children, particularly children who had come from situations of serious trauma. It could include child abuse or medical trauma, or prolonged separations from a parent, where maybe the parent had a medical issue and now they were struggling with breaks in their attachment and trust and connection. So a range of kinds of really serious problems that these children were struggling with, and it was having a downstream impact on family dynamics and family functioning.
Right.
I've been trained in some psychological specialized techniques to help these children. One was called TheraPlay, which is an experiential family therapy approach. Another is EMDR, or eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And these approaches were working fairly well. And still I was running into some roadblocks with certain kids that it just, I could not figure out how to make a breakthrough. And having this colleague come and apply some just very basic yoga therapy principles, I could see how it really opened up avenues for the person. It might be like a blockage in their breathing, or they would be noticing, doing a certain exercise and noticing an area that felt tight. And that tightness, when they started to stretch, it was actually related to an emotional feeling, and they would have an experience some release from that. So I was listening to her stories and seeing some of what she was doing, and I just like, okay, I want that for me. So that was, this one pathway. I wanted something that was more experiential and physical, because I was also realizing, at this time in the psychological world, there was a huge emphasis on cognitive behavioral therapy. Like, if you change your thinking, then you'll change your emotional experience of life, which is true. And still, you run into some serious roadblocks. There's some people who just changing this higher level thinking, it doesn't work. And in trauma is in particular is one of those areas where there's a very physical, so man, you can think and be saying to yourself, oh, I'm safe. But your body is saying you are not safe, because your body has gone through so much conditioning, either as a child or a veteran or some other experience, that your body says you're not safe.
Yeah.
And in those situations, you really need a physical or somatic way to access those feelings and desensitize them or decondition them.
Right.
So that was this pathway. Now I mentioned one other pathway here, because this is the psychological work pathway, the experience of life exercise pathway. But then there's this other spiritual side of things. And I had been practicing a lot of meditation and other spiritual practices during this period, many of them from my own background and training as a child growing up, things I've been taught by my parents. And I was looking for ways to integrate spirituality in a way that could be very acceptable to anybody, or at least to most people. Because if you come at it from a very religious perspective, then only people from that religion can, get what you're trying to say. But if there's a more, ecumenical or broad approach, and so I wanted it for myself, but I also wanted to be able to share that with other people. And psychology has kind of a tenuous relationship with religion. I mean, it's more, or just, I should say, spirituality, because there's a difference between religious.
Your story is really illustrating how, in our Western mindset, psychology, you just made the point with religion is separate, physical stuff is separate, maybe even sort of like athletics is yet separate, and they're just all in separate boxes: nutrition, business school. So you're kind of showing us how all the schools on a university have their own building, but they don't have pathways to each other.
Yeah.
So you're kind of showing us that in your healing, you needed more pathways between the different things. Like you needed them all.
Well, you see, it's not that there's no pathway, Bob. It's more like the pathway between buildings is like a little dirt path that a few students have carved through the grassy lawn because they want to know how like physics relates to psychology or religion relates to some anthropology or something, yeah. And I wanted to be in a situation where we could just bring them all together and put them in one building.
Right. Yeah. Cool. So, okay. So I think you had to do teacher's training in order to do yoga therapy because that's somewhat of a prerequisite, correct?
Yes. I looked around. I realized that if I wanted to use yoga, I needed some good quality training in how to approach it so that I avoided hurting people.
Yeah.
Because yoga can actually be a little bit dangerous. When I started getting into it more, occasionally I had a couple times where I injured myself by pushing something too much.
Right.
And so I realized, just like any other physical endeavor, it needs to be done with the right mindset and with safety. So that was why I ended up, I interviewed at a couple of different places and then finally chose the YogaLife Institute as my training center for yoga teacher training.
Gotcha. And then was that with the idea of doing yoga therapy, or was that a secondary? Was that after you?
No, that was my intention from the first was to do that for that first year, and then I would enter into the yoga therapy program.
Okay. Yeah, a few people have gone that route. Yeah. Yeah. So how about if we go to teacher's training? What were some of your nuggets from that experience? And then we'll jump in and hear about your yoga therapy experience.
All right. Number one, letting go of the ego.
Whoa.
American athletics, and I would say this is probably true for most athletics, but I say American because I'm grown up in America and have been very immersed in the culture, and we have an extremely hyper competitive culture. Everything is competitive.
Right.
Like the board games we play as a child are competitive.
Yeah.
The playground games are primarily competitive. The sports we played, somehow it's always competitive. Sailing, you got sailing. Everybody wants to be competitive, and you don't really question it because it's always competitive. In fact, you kind of get the feeling like if it's not competitive, what's the point in doing it?
Yeah.
Until you experience some other way or see that there's an alternative. And it hit me that having spent some time interacting with people from other cultures, that this is not necessarily the norm. And it's not really the healthiest. But I was immersed from that perspective in every, martial arts. There's this direct competitive element. Like, I'm going to fight you and see if I can win. And even when you're practicing your moves, it's like, I'm practicing the most perfect punch. And look at that guy. I don't have the most perfect punch, That same mentality ended up in my early classes. I was kind of always comparing myself to other people, or comparing myself to what maybe I could do previously the day before, and thinking, today I should do it at least as good, if not better.
Right.
Now, there's two problems with this approach. Number one, you're going to injure yourself. And number two, you're mostly going to be miserable.
Mhm. Yeah,
Because, you're never good enough. It's the
right.
nature of, perfection is
I
this.
often think of it, as like a pyramid. And if there's one gold medalist in the Olympic event, then there's thousands of people that tried that didn't make the Olympics. And then those who did, there's still only one winner.
Right.
And we don't credit the trying. So I guess doing yoga poses without competition allowed you to then deprogram yourself, if we would say, even for the psychologist. Like, you were
Bob,
experiencing the competitiveness going out of your ego, or your ego structure?
I just realized fairly quickly, because of the some of the comments that were made in class and sort of my own experience of this, that this was not healthy. And it would take a little bit of practice to change it.
Mm.
And the first thing that I had to do was close my eyes. Like, I would close my eyes through the entire class, except when I was doing a balancing pose, probably, so that I was not focused on what other people were doing. And I could avoid the comparison. And I was also avoiding thinking about, like, oh, somebody's looking at me and thinking my pose is not good enough.
Right. No, that's just a very interesting thing. And what you're making me think of, just before you go into your second point, is I've never thought about how the competitive nature of things then gets into a yoga class, and then people push it, and that's how all the injuries happen with yoga. Whereas if you're following the principles of yoga, you would know it's about nonviolence and enlightenment and love and so forth, and then you don't come. But in any case, that's a really great point. Thank you for making that. What's your second one?
Well, second one, then I'll have a little bit of a third point that sort of tails off of what you just said. The second one was changing the focus, which is essentially what your point is there, of what is the goal. Because there is, even if one avoids competition with other people, there is still this internal dialogue where one is competing with oneself, from yesterday or looking to the future. And that is also a recipe for problems. Because if you think that yesterday I, was able to touch my head to my knees, and now today I should be able to do the same thing, and you try to do that, today might be the day that you pull a hamstring.
Right.
If the focus is changed to be, there's this, I want to call it a spiritual focus. Some people might get confused by that term or not like it. So I'll also say an internal self-development focus, a personal insight focus, or a psychological development focus, whatever term you want to use. But if you say the goal for me for today is to experience centeredness and connection to my body and connection to my spirit, and to walk out of here a person who is more grounded and able to be caring and loving to others, then how far you stretch doesn't matter.
Right.
How your pose looks really matters not at all.
Right.
It's about where your mind and your body are during the time while you're doing that thing, or what you're learning about your body in the now.
Right. Beautiful. Yeah, that's well put. That would be kind of a very eloquent way to talk about intention. When we set an intention for yoga, and that's, we also teach people, as you would know, when they're doing athletics, to have a spiritual intention, not I'm going to win. If you try to win, you will ultimately tense and feel anxious. If you have what you just said, and you're really explaining it well, an internal focus of spiritual development of some sort, and you play your sport or you play your instrument or you take a test at school or whatever it is, go to work, you will not feel anxious and you will actually hit a higher level of creativity. And your performance will actually increase because there's nothing inside blocking you. So that's wonderful. Yeah. Excellent. So you have number 3, because everybody who's listening here, like the points that Rand is making kind of explain that, like when you do a yoga teacher's training from our perspective, we're really teaching the full yoga, which we were then terming as yoga therapy, including all aspects of life. So your things that you're talking about from teacher's training would also be like from yoga therapy. It's almost the same thing. But what, you had a third one?
Well, the third comes to the comment that you made earlier about enlightenment or spiritual change.
Mm-hmm.
And the shift for me in that first year from this competitive element to an internal spiritual focus might have been the most significant for me. And helped me go into those other years of yoga therapy training specifically with a better mindset. There is this idea, I'll use a technical term, dharma. Like there's so much debate about, what does that term mean? But if we say that dharma is that spiritual focus, to be in connection with the spirit of the universe, and to be acting out of a place of love, then that becomes your intention. And that was really helpful for me over those years to think, okay, that's my roadmap. Put your intention to have that connection to the love of the universe and to live it, to experience it, right? And then the other, like the competitive stuff, fades to the side quite a bit.
Right.
And the reason for learning any particular strategy or technique becomes more clear.
In fact, everybody, we've known each other for a number of years, obviously. And I remember some of our conversations about you, and I was thinking, this guy trains other psychologists. What's he coming to us for? Yoga teachers, he's kind of been through this. He knows how to listen, but you still hone things within yourself, and each person takes away their own personal, benefits. But I think what I'm seeing now very clearly that I didn't exactly understand, although we accomplished it, and you worked really hard on yourself, as you always do. But when you have that competitive side of things, that, like you said, it's not that we go to work saying, I'm going to win today, but it's part of the culture. And when you're in your shoes, if you're in the helping profession, you have to be successful and the person has to get better or you lost. It's a weird way that competition would get into it. Like if your client comes in, I come in and I'm unhappy. If I leave still unhappy, you lost. And you may lose your job eventually if all of us leave unhappy and we don't improve, right? You end up losing your job because you're ineffective and nobody would come to you. But you would then have an internal pressure to have to succeed and be like on the edge of your psychological chair, helping all of your clients.
Oh yeah. And
that would make you a really bad psychologist because you'd feel pressure. And then I would start as your client I'd be like, well, Dr. Wren, I'm trying to get better for you. I'm trying to make you successful, Dr. Rand, because you're helping me. And you had this competition really throws it off. So all the things that you have explained probably, and I remember this happening for you. You became more relaxed in your profession, actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that would then your own personal stress level, is about caring for others, but it's not that you stopped caring. You just let things unfold more naturally as opposed to forcing them, if I remember.
This could be a whole day's worth of discussion all by itself.
Yeah.
Suffice it to say that, yes, within the psychological profession, there is competition.
Yeah.
For who is, anything from has the most publications to who is the most successful with their clients.
Yeah.
Now, and this is a tough dynamic, because people in the helping profession, especially in counseling, psychiatry, psychology, way overestimate their actual effectiveness. And this has been researched where, they'll say, okay, how effective do you think you were at, making this person feel better, resolving their depression? They'll say, oh, like 70% effective. But if you actually measured, they'll give a rating scale to the client to see how much their depression has improved, and it might only be, say, 20% improved that session or something. Part of the problem is because it's all happening in a very confidential setting with limited measurement tools. You don't know how other people are doing, and you can't really compare.
Right.
And there is a reality to this, that if you're doing a bunch of counseling or anything, spiritual insight promotion, and nobody gets any better, like, what's the point? Like, stop doing it and go collect mushrooms or study rocks or something, do something else worthwhile
definitely
with your life. So yes, there is this goal that people will be better in their life, that they'll be less anxious, they'll be more effective at doing whatever they want to do in life, they'll have better relationships with the people around them, they'll have less fear in their life. And if the helping profession does none of that, then there's no point to it.
Right.
On the other hand, if you go into a session with a person with this preordained idea, like, oh, I am going to fix that person, there are a host of flaws within that thinking. The first is that you started the sentence with I, and then you said, am going to, like, I am somehow going to make them do something. No, neither one is going to happen, most likely.
Right.
And fix them. Like, how do you really know that they need to be fixed? Like, yeah, they may feel bad about life, but, fix is kind of a tricky assumption. All right. So
yeah, so
I know that's a lot to say to look
no,
at
I know. So the way that
this equation,
in yoga, we talk about non-attachment, not being attached to the results, whereas yes, there are outcomes, but then there's this whole results thinking. And I think you've actually improved your results by doing less, which allows the client to be more empowered because they have to do the work. That would be one of our fundamental principles.
It's that you just referenced that fourfold sequence or path, right? Now, that was really significant for me, really helpful for me throughout the yoga therapy training. One of those elements is to be competent, and within the world of the helping profession, and I'm talking primarily here about, psychology, counseling, marriage and family counseling, coaching, would include psychiatry, and this is actually applies to medicine in general as well. There are certain things that you can do that will be better than other things that you do. So in most situations, if you sit with mindfulness with another person and you express a non-judgmental attitude, you accept them as they are in this moment, and you can actually convey that to them. Like, there are ways to, you might have that in your head, but you might not convey it in your attitude. That's
right.
Another problem. But you learn to convey that in your tone of voice, your facial expression,
Yep.
the words that you say. That will have a powerful impact.
Yep.
Even if you give no antibiotic or other medical treatment, that
Right.
alone has an impact.
Absolutely.
Right? Then there are some skillful techniques. If you can understand where that person is coming from, kind of what their needs are and their personality, and their mental capabilities, then you will know, if you've had the proper training, oh, there are some techniques that will help with this.
Right.
For instance, if somebody has panic attacks, is prone to that, we know that certain types of breathing techniques will help them. And we can offer that to the person. But even how you offer it, like if you say, oh, you must do this breathing technique, and then you will feel so much, that's probably, for many people, the wrong way to do it.
Yeah.
Because there'll be a resistance to doing something new and different. Or if they don't experience success right away, then they blame you. So even in how you offer something, like saying, would you like to try something that might help? This is a different approach. Like, it's your choice, and let's look at the advantages and disadvantages of trying this new thing. Then you're giving agency to the individual. And by giving agency to the individual, you are showing your belief in their capabilities and in their competency and their ability to grow. You're saying, I believe in you and you have choice here. And I'll give you an example. I was working with a kid about like 12, 13 years old, bright kid. And she was struggling with some anxiety and very obsessive types of thinking and stuff. And I jumped in and said, oh, we're going to do this breathing technique. It's really going to help you. And then you're going to, face your fears and all this. And after about halfway through the second session, she broke down crying. And she says, this isn't working for me. This is not the type of therapy that I wanted. And now I started feeling a little defensive, like, well, you said you wanted, and I know best. You're only 12. What do you know? But I reined it in. I said, I'm so sorry. Obviously what I'm doing is really missing the mark. If it's not working for you, I'm clearly, I misinterpreted what you needed. What is it that you really feel you were wanting? She says, I want to be able to share a problem that I'm having. And if you could help me think about it and then maybe get some insight. Like, great. What's the problem? And she shared some problems she was having. It might have been about feeling judged by friends, or, feeling, insecure about something. And then I was able to choose from an array of things that I knew about. Let's take a look at what's going on in your mind. Would you like to do that? She said, yes, I would like to do that. And let's compare this thought to this other alternative thought. What happens when you think those different thoughts? And she processed it and finally concluded, gosh, this thought is a very destructive thought. This thought is a helpful thought. And when I do it, I feel very centered and I'm no longer worried about these things that people might think of me. I say, go forth and think that thought. Practice it every day. And she left. That changed the whole dynamic. And so then each session was coming in. So she was, I was having to let go of what I thought had to be true. Now, and here's, so this, what I'm trying to focus on here is like this idea of giving agency to the person and also practicing with the greatest amount of competency that you are capable of practicing.
Right.
And that,
I think it's a hard point to describe, but I understand where you're going. And I think when you empower the client, they then, as this young girl did, she then told you what she actually needed, because you empowered her, right? And you listened to her, and you paused, and you apologized as a expert in the field, and then you gave her total power. And then she told you what she really needed. You asked her, you listened, you supported her, and then she then also told you, basically on a silver tray, this is what's happening to me. And it was very easy for you to present something, whether that was a psychological tool or a yogic tool. It's the same, think this thought gives you this feeling, that thought gives you that feeling. And it's a beautiful example. So one thing
before we go on, Bob, I do want to tie this back to something, because we have yet to get to the fourth and final stage of that fourfold. Fourfold principles. I guess I'm making this idea, like drawing off this idea that there are certain ways of helping people that are more effective more of the time than other ways. And you see this across professions. And I think that's one of the things that yoga therapy practice really helped me to hone. Like, I've been through a lot of, counseling 101, counseling 405, but within the context of the yoga training, we were really sitting down with each other and practicing these different skills, like listening skills, questioning skills, skillful questioning to help the other person have more insight or awareness. And then using specifically yoga-based movement and breathing and thought experiments to help the other person grow. So we were actually getting therapy ourselves and seeing how it worked on us. And then getting a chance to see other people, like us, present these techniques and see the other person benefit or not benefit, and then tell us what would benefit more. That really honed my capacity to be in the moment, trusting in my instincts, and practicing really concrete, specific skills. So that was valuable. Now, there was this other component where you were mentioning attachment to results. And part of the problem of the competitive element is that you want to say, oh, I cured this person. When the reality is that as a therapist, even, like as a physician, most of the time, we are more like a catalyst, a basically inert substance that in the context of the right situation causes change to happen more quickly if we kind of do some of the right things. And then we're stepping back. Now, we have to be have a certain degree of acceptance of ourselves and our limitations so that we can go into a situation with somebody else, do our absolute best, use our skills to the maximum that we are capable of using them. And at that point, say, hey, I did my best. This person it's now in this other person's hand and the fates of the universe. And I let go of, this is what you say, I let go of attachment to the outcome. The outcome is the outcome, and I've done my best as the catalyst. And now I'm going to go,
Excellent.
work in the garden or something like that.
That takes a lot of work and years of cultivation. So we could talk all day, of course, about all these different situations, and this has all been really helpful. I did notice that yoga therapy is becoming a part of your job description now. As we think about your future with yoga therapy, as we're getting close to wrapping our conversation. So you're now providing yoga therapy along with your psychological services officially? How is that? Or is it
yes,
sideways?
Bob, they're coming back to our previous metaphor, they're all in the same building now. But not only are the subjects in the same building, they are now the same subject.
Wow.
We no longer have physics and yoga. We just have therapy. Let's just sit down and do this.
Right.
Now, I'm being a little bit facetious because, you know, there's still with some people, it's all one thing. You know, that I don't call it yoga therapy. I just say, hey, we're gonna sit down. I'll help you with your life a little bit. I hope, you know, and we do whatever needs to be done in that session. And sometimes it's some yoga, sometimes it's some energy work, sometimes it's working on the mind. Sometimes it's a role play about how to be more socially appropriate or something. It all kind of blends together because you might, to be more socially appropriate and to deal with some social anxiety, you might need to breathe, drop your shoulders, relax, centered, feel your energy, and then practice your conversation. Now, I am this year putting it out there that for people who specifically want yoga therapy, like that, they really want the specifically yoga approach, I will reserve a number of spots during my day or during my week where people can come in and just have a yoga therapy experience. So that, anyways, I mean, people who are interested in this will know that there's certain things that if you're a marriage therapist, these are the things you expect to do. If you're a yoga therapist, this is the other things you expect to do, and they can look very differently. And some people want, that really specific experience. So,
right. Yeah. Well, that's awesome. So thank you so much, Dr. Rand.
Yeah.
For giving us these deep dives in conversations that we could have with you for hours.
It's fun talking about this stuff with you.
Yeah. And I will tell you that, your fellow graduates are all very similar where they start to get into a specific topic. And I think it's to say that, Rand and I discussed 4 or 5 topics today, but you could have discussed far more. But the beauty is that you gave us some stories and some examples so that people can get a sense that, okay, when you start using all aspects, we use the image of the college, all the buildings talking to each other and then having one big building. I can see your university would be one big building. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for sharing and giving us a little glimpse into all the work you've done and the work that you do. And more power to you. And thank you for helping us all.
Yeah, thank you.